Hey Opties! Today we're talking about 9 of the basic geometry terms. We've got a definition by Euclid for most of them, and then a more current definition that we'll use typically when we talk about this in class. Euclid is known as the father of geometry. So if you think about, geometry's been around for a pretty good while, so some of his language is pretty archaic. So if you see his definition, you're like, that's kind of strange. Well, it was some old language used. So I encourage you to, as I'm talking about these, I'm just going to summarize and kind of put things in my own words, which is part of the definitions on some of these. But I would like for you to read through each of these to all full extent and just kind of take this video as me going in depth a little bit. So make sure you read each of these as well. The first one we have is point. So a point is just a dot to show a location. It has 0 dimension, so you can't really measure a point. You can just kind of tell where it is. The second one we have is line. If you take a bunch of points and you put them right next to each other, like an infinite amount of points, you'll make a line. I like to think about a line by doing this, where my thumbs are arrows. So a line goes on forever in both directions. Euclid said this is breadthless length. A breadth is a type of measurement. So a line, you can't really measure it because it goes on for forever. It's an infinite length. And it has 1 dimension. If you take a ruler to a line, of course you can't measure it, but you're only going one way. You're either going this way, or a diagonal direction, but you can't go more than one direction, so it has 1 dimension. The third one is plane. I like to call this an infinite piece of paper. You really only have to have 3 lines to define a plane because you can kind of make a surface that way. Surface is a great word to help you remember what a plane is. So a plane is just a 2-dimensional surface that extends in all directions. So an infinite piece of paper. And that's 2-dimensional, so a length and a width. The next one is ray. A ray starts with a point, and then on the other end has an arrow. So it's like half of a line. It's not necessarily half, but it's one-sided, right? Because it starts with a point and it has an arrow. So you're taking a line and you're cutting it off on one end. And if you take 2 rays, you'll make an angle. So rays are the building blocks for angles. Next is segment. So a segment is a piece of a line. It's where you take a line and you cut it off on both ends. And on both ends there are points. They're called endpoints. You can actually measure a line segment because it ends. Our next one is perpendicular. That's like one of the biggest words we got going on here. A big word that goes with perpendicular is right angles. So if you got 2 lines or segments or rays, just one of those that are straight lines, straight segment, straight ray, and they intersect, which means they cross. If they intersect to form 2 right angles, or 4 if you're going all the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 angles here. If you intersect to form right angles, that's called being perpendicular to each other. So perpendicular can be used as an adjective to describe the relationship between 2 lines or segments or rays. And it can also be used as a noun. So I can say this line is a perpendicular to this line. So you'll hear that sometimes. Parallel means that you're never ever going to touch. And parallel is always describing lines or segments or rays. Typically lines. So parallel, you're never ever going to touch. So if my hands are never going to touch, that means that the tilt of them always stays the same. We'll learn about this on the coordinate grid or coordinate plane in the next unit as well. Next, we've got angle. Previously, I said that 2 rays make an angle. So if you take 2 rays, put them together where kind of like the pieces of my hand here are a point, then that makes an angle. So an angle measures the distance between 2 rays. So if you're building things, a lot of times we use right angles, like we talked about with perpendicular. We've got lots of different types of angles that we'll get it more in depth in. Lastly, we have circle. I know you've heard about circles before, even since you were a little kid probably. We'll get into depth in a whole entire unit about circles later on in the year. But for now, let's just think about a circle has a center point. It's called the center. And the segment that has its endpoints as the center and any point on the circle is called a radius. So basically halfway across the circle through the center. If you go all the way across the circle through the center, you have a diameter. So it's like a double radius. And what's cool is that any radius, since it can go from the center to any point on the circle, is equal to any other radius. So all radii of the same circle are equivalent. Okay, that's some basic geometry terms to help us have some building blocks for discussing things more further in geometry. So see y'all next time.